We're going to start now where we left off, kind of, which is the dead 3 years, the dead zone of the Starchild story. And I made it sound like absolutely nothing was happening, but that's not true. Things were happening. People were sending me interesting information. Remember, I was not really a UFO alien person, so I didn't know a lot about the field, and I was learning all the time as I would meet new people, and people would hear about what I was doing, and they would send me information, some of which was really good. One of which came from a guy named David Chase in Seattle, and he said, I've written a book, published a book, which I have a copy of, and which I'll have at the back of the table, and you can look through it, or I'll show it at the end before we move back there so you can kind of see it. And what he did, it's a full book filled with pictures. In 1997, he called everybody that had ever said or claimed or was willing to talk about seeing an alien. And he didn't make any judgments. Didn't matter what kind of crackpots they were, what kind of cockamamie story they had. They would tell him, and he would draw as best he could what they were telling him. And he found that over time they clustered into groups, one of which is the rarest of all, which are called the blue men, the little blue men. They look like fire plugs. And I've done this lecture I don't know how many times, and finally, several months ago when I was in New Zealand, a woman just screamed out of the crowd, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. I've finally seen one. I saw these, and I've been trying for 20 years to get people to believe me, and nobody will." And because they are very rare. But that's what they are. But in general, they are the small grays. You've all heard of small grays. They're the tall grays. You've all heard of that, and that's a variation on that. And then there are a couple of hybrids out there that are pretty interesting. We have the gray, and this is the Pleiadian, the Lyran, the Anunnaki, whatever you want to call them, the ones that look like humans, the ones that are supposed to look like humans. And then you have the reptiles. Everybody knows about the reptilians, reptiles. And then here should be standing an insect. An insectoid, really ugly, really bad. But this is supposedly a hybrid between the reptilian and one of the human types. And I'm sorry, reptile and the gray rather. This is supposed to be a hybrid between a gray and the human type. And we think maybe that the Starchild, that's what David was saying was, I think maybe your Starchild might be one of these, because enough people had reported them. So it was believable, and at the time that's began to be kind of what, at first I was thinking it was a gray, just a gray. It was so different from the physiology you saw. There's really no human corollaries. But David said there are some hybrids out there, and your Starchild could be one of them. So my mind opened up to the idea, well, maybe it's a hybrid. Could be. So anyway, but the fact that there was no insect and the reptilian was wrapped up in a robe, I said, David, why'd you do that? Why'd you put the reptile in a robe and leave the insects off? And he said, well, man, are you kidding? I didn't want to scare people off with the cover, with a scary cover. I want people to buy it, So, okay, that makes sense. So, anyway, keep that one in mind, and it is an interesting book to look through. Now, this is where it starts to get really interesting. You've all heard the story, I hope, but if you haven't, for those who haven't, I'm going to go over it, of women who claim they have been harvested. This is a program in which aliens, grays usually, come down, take women, generally young women, on board a craft, and they make them pregnant. Make them pregnant. No question that they're pregnant. They miss their periods. They go to the doctor. They get a sonogram, and they are pregnant, very frequently with twins. And then in the 4th month, always in the 4th month, apparently, I say that, but some people have said, no, sometimes it comes, they do it later. But generally, let me say, in the 4th month, they will be taken back on board. The fetus will be removed. They will be put back in their beds, and they'll wake up the next morning with every sign of a miscarriage, but no fetus. They have been harvested. And those fetuses go, apparently, to the craft where they are put in glass jars of fluid and where they are brought to term, and then they're put in incubators, because in David Chase's book you can see pictures of that where people had memories of, this is what I saw, and he would just draw what they said they saw. And you'll see several examples of the test tubes, of the big tubes, and the incubator type situation where they're being, brought to full term. Very interesting stuff. Now, I've talked to about a dozen women personally, watched them break down and cry and all that. You can believe what you want. I think there's something to this because their stories are all the same, and it's really heart-wrenching when they talk about it. One of whom contacted me was named Josie Galante. Now, Josie is an artist from Taos, New Mexico. And I'd never met her, of course. I'd never met any of these women before this. And she said, I was harvested. I was made pregnant in 1990. 1990. I knew I was pregnant, went through the routine, and was harvested. 5 years later, and the women are generally in a few years, whether it's 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 years later, they're taken back on board and they're shown a child, a hybrid child, which they describe with chilling sameness, and they say, this is yours. You're free to bond with it, talk to it, get to know it, spend some time with it, connect with it. You are its mother. And they do that, and they come to believe it's really their child. Josie came to believe this boy that she drew was hers. Now, this is just a depiction from a film, but it shows you what they all say. Thin, sparse, blondish kind of hair, and they look unkempt, and they're very sad, and they're very waif-like. This little boy depicts it very, very well. However they did that makeup job, this is a good job of what you hear them describing boys and girls like. It's very, very sad to hear it up close and personal right in your face. Heart-wrenching. So Josie said, I drew pictures of my boy because sometimes the women don't have good memories. They put, as you've heard, I'm sure, aliens put memory screens on you when you have this experience. And sometimes you come out with very poor memory, sometimes you come out with partial memory, and sometimes you come out with pretty good memory. It just depends on how you react to the memory screen that they put on you. She said, I have a pretty good memory, and I drew what I saw. Would you like to see the pictures? And I said, absolutely, sure. Why not? Send them on. And this is what she sent front view. Pretty interesting. Now, this is the side view, profile shot. Look at that. This was in 1995, and we did the Starchild came out in 1999, so no way for her to correlate. But look at this. Look at the size of the neck and the way the head shaped and all that. Now, he does have a little brow ridge. He does have a little dip in the nose. That's a little, she wouldn't necessarily get every detail right, but son of a gun, huh? Now, another one is this one. 1978, a lawyer, a male lawyer. And he had the money to have a sculpture done, and he had pretty good memory of it, too. Now, one thing to mention is men don't talk about this nearly as much as women. But men seem to be taken with as much regularity as women. But the reason men don't talk about it is real simple. For the joke that everybody makes of what has come to be called, quote, the anal probe. You've maybe heard that term, the anal probe. Comedians make fun of it all the time. That if you believe in UFOs and aliens, the first thing a critic is going to say, oh, you believe the anal probe, da-da-da-da, and all that. Well, obviously, why? Because if they're going after sperm, that's the direct route to it. Just stick a needle right through there and you're right into the prostate and you're getting what you want. So men are ashamed and don't talk about it as much. But this guy did. And so he had this sculpture made, and this is a pretty good sculpture, I think. Notice, remember the Starchild's eye sockets, how they were, and if the eyes they were down like here. So it's going to require a really big eyelid to get from the top down. Now the nose, again, is not like it was with the Starchild, but the eyes could be pretty good. The nose could be pretty good as far as the shape, mouth, but the cheekbones and that are not like it would have been relative to the Starchild, and the neck of this is pretty big, and no crease in the top. So some differences, but some similarities as well. And you look at the three of them rather, together, and you see pretty interesting. Now, another thing that's pretty interesting is the coneheads. People say to me, is there anything else like the Starchild? No, not that I'm aware of. And I think I get probably every weird skull in the world sent to me. I am like Weird Skull Central. So there is no Starchild that I'm aware of. But there are plenty of what are called coneheads. In fact, there are several hundred coneheads from around the world, most of which are found in Peru because the Atacama Desert is so dry that the bones are preserved. And so the museums of Peru have hundreds of these things. And you can see them. Now, what does science say? This is not, by the way, an x-ray of this one, two different ones, doesn't matter. The point is to be made is this. What science says about all of them is they dismiss them with one simple phrase: head binding. Not cradle boarding, head binding, different thing. What is head binding? Head binding is reshaping a human head to look different than it's supposed to look. And it's fairly common. You can do it by, like the American Flathead Indians did it with boards. Board here, board here, board here, and you make it so that the forehead would go back, and it was looking kind of like this, but not exactly this. Or in Africa, they take twine and they wrap it very tightly around the head, and the twine marks are left in the cranium and the bone, just like it is with the bones. But in almost all cases that happens, where they deform the head like that, the soft spot never closes, always stays open, because the head needs to shape in a certain way for that to happen. So you can pretty well tell when it's happened to a human being. And you can also tell that it's happened to a human being in one simple way. The brain is still about 1,400 cubic centimeters. Still the same brain. It's a human, just reshaped. The 1,400 cubic centimeters are reshaped. The coneheads, on the other hand, average between 2,800 and 3,000 cubic centimeters. Twice the size of our brains. Twice the size of our brains. And look, the brains fill the cavity. It's not any kind of deformity. It's not hydrocephaly. It's their brains grow twice the size of our brains. Is that a human? No, it's not. It's not what humans do. It's a human-like face, no question, but it's not a human brain or a human head. I've been saying for 10 years now the coneheads should be DNA tested the same way I needed the Starchild to be DNA tested. And so as far as I know, nobody's done it. But I can tell you, if I'm successful with the Starchild, the first thing I'm going to do afterwards, but I won't be able to beat science to it, is to DNA test the coneheads. Because once it's okay to acknowledge alien existence, they're going to start popping up probably in hidden drawers in museums all over the world. Watch and see. So this is variations on a theme of there's something going on out there because it's so consistently the same. Right? Now, not only was I getting interesting stories, I was getting interesting interpretations of how the Starchild might have looked in life. And this is a pretty good one that came from an early magazine cover where the graphic artist morphed his daughter to try to make her fit to the skull. And hey, I remember him telling me, man, it's really hard. You can't get everything lined up. I got to really Photoshop her face really bad. And, I said, well, it's not human, He said, but yeah. He said, I think you'll like what I did. And I do. I think that's pretty cool. Pretty interesting to me anyway. Now another one was Bill McDonald was the first serious artist to take a shot at it, this guy right here, and this is what he handed in. And now we have all seen these eyes on a really grim Sunday morning after a really bad Saturday night. We all know those eyes. But they don't necessarily fit with the Starchild because the lids aren't high enough and long enough, and it just didn't come out right. Just doesn't look like what I thought it should look. Now this is a girl named Katie Lin. She's Oriental, Chinese girl, very good artist as you see, and she got, I think, a better look, got the eyes a little better, but they both missed the dent in the head, covered it up with hair best they could. But I like her eyes. The face is a little bit better, a little heavy on the chin, I think. The neck is a lot closer to his neck. So, we're getting there, but we're still, kind of missing the boat. Then a guy named Mark Savee came up with this idea, which I thought was pretty cool. He tried to kind of match things up, and he came out with, I think, some pretty good looks. The eyes, pretty good with the heavy brow. He completely missed the dent in the head. The ears might be pretty good. The nose is pretty interesting, too, I think. The mouth, I think it's too low to the nose, and the chin is way too big, way too much jaw to this one. Neck's pretty good, though, but in the end it came out interesting. That's an interesting look, I think. Then came my friend Rob Roy Menzies, a guy who became a friend, artist in Alaska, you know. Now, I said, Rob Roy, that's a pretty good idea. That's a pretty good look here, taking the X-ray and building the face on it. But, you know, could you make it a little less constipated looking? Could you give me something feeling a little better about things, you know? So he came up with this here, which is, you know, ugly enough to make a freight train take a dirt road. And so I said, can you work it a little bit, give me a little bit more feeling, a little more human? And he came up with this one, which is, you know, still there, but not quite. So we continued to work on it back and forth. And in the end, he came up, with that one, which I think is pretty good. I like that one in a lot of ways. Got the dent, got the look. I think pretty in the ballpark, in my opinion. Now, I compare it to this, which you all should know is what? The cover of Whitley Strieber's famous book, Communion. Communion. It's a 20-year-old book, but if you're in this field, you should know about it. And if you don't, here's the deal. Communion is the biggest selling book ever in the field of alternative knowledge. And there's a reason for it. Whitley Strieber had been a mainstream writer, and he had a mainstream agent named Russell Galen, one of the very best agents in the field, and Russell Galen got this book published. Nobody generally in mainstream publishing will handle anything to do with aliens and UFOs. But Whitley had enough of a career. He had written Wolfen. He had written 2 or 3 movies. He was well known. And when he wrote his book saying that he was in regular contact with aliens, they knew they had an idea that it was going to be successful because he was well known. So they commissioned an artist to create a picture of the alien like Whitley talked about in the book. The guy came in with this, and the editors and publishers at the publishing house went, whoa, what a dramatic, startling, grim, boy, that face is going to jump off covers and sell millions of copies for it, which it did. That cover was amazing, and still is. Very stark, very graphic. But when Whitley saw it, he said, that doesn't really look like what they look like. And they said, well, yeah, but it doesn't matter. It's business. We want to make some money. This cover's going to sell millions of books. And well, he said, yeah, but it doesn't really look like the way they look. Doesn't matter. We're going to make money. Money, 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 money. And they did. And so Whitley just sort of shut up. Now, Bud Hopkins tells this story in a 2007 edition of MUFON Journal. Why he gave this secret away, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to tell you. He did. It's there. You can read it. At first, everybody in the UFO field that knew anything about this was kind of upset that this false image was going out as the foreboding image of grays. But Bud and the others, David Jacobs and the others who do this, but particularly Bud and David Jacobs, began to realize, hey, we can use this as a litmus test. And so they began to use this, and when someone would say, I've seen an alien, I want to be to hypnotized and taken back and go through the whole rigmarole. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money on the part of these guys. And you got a lot of kooks out there and a lot of wackos and a lot of people looking for attention. And you got to find a way to weed them out. And so that's what they do. They would stick this picture in front of people and say, knowing full well that everybody, pretty much knew that this is it. This is what grays are supposed to look like. Say, is this what a gray looks like to you? And if the person says, yeah, they know right away that this person is probably shining them on and it's a waste of their time and trouble. But if they stick that picture in front of them and they say, does this look like what you saw? And that person kind of knows they're supposed to say, yeah. But if that person says, no, that's not really what I saw something different, right away they know, this could be the real deal. Because they're going to describe something much closer to this than this. Interesting little tidbit that I put out just for you to know. Now, okay, a lot of people have said, has anybody ever made a sculpture? Ever made a sculpture? Ever made a sculpture? We had so much trouble with the artists, what's the point? nobody can really get it unless I'm there like I was with Rob Roy, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And nobody wants to do that. Everybody wants to interpret it their way, putting their own, their own impressions, their own spin, whatever on it. So we've been on several television shows in the States. The most recent one was UFO Hunters. UFO Hunters, which is on the History Channel. I don't know when it'll come here or if it already has. Doesn't matter. It's a pretty good piece, except for the sculpture. Now, here's the story of the sculpture. They said, we would like to do a sculpture to make that a part of the show. And I said, well, you're going to have real problems if you do that, because no forensic sculptor is going to have a background that will allow them to build an alien-like face. All they're going to have in their heads is the human template, and what you're going to get is a big head with a human face, period. Unless I'm there standing right over their shoulder, guiding them along and making the corrections. And they said, well, we can't afford to fly you. Okay, UFO Hunters, she says, is on YouTube. Anyway, you can see it. But they said, we can't afford to fly you out. We're low, not a high-budget show. Can't do that, sorry. We're just going to have to take a flyer and hope for the best. They contacted a real true forensic artist in New Jersey, top of his game. Guy said he's going to charge them $8,000 to do it. A fair price for what they do. It's a lot of work. They weren't going to pay that either. So they just called up the street to Universal Studios and they said, hey, you got any model makers there for the movie business who will be willing to build this face for us? And it got a guy on the phone. He said, yeah, I'll do that for $2,000, no problem. And that's who they chose, the model maker. Now, I'm not saying he did a really horrible job. He kind of knew the rules and all, but this is the face that he came up with, and this is what you see on the show. Now, does this face remind you of anybody? Has this face reminded you of anybody? What about Lee Harvey Oswald? Lee Harvey Oswald, under a big head. I took one look at it and I said, God, they got Lee Harvey there. How did they do that? Anyway, just a waste of time and effort and money. And it's a shame that they put it out there now. It's kind of like the cover of the book. People are going to think this is how the Starchild might have looked in life, and it's just complete garbage. We're going to have to live with it until we can afford to have a real one do it with me guiding them through it and getting it right. We can do it, just going to take time. Now, this is a little interesting, a little closer to the mark, I think. This is the famous Amoco ad of about 15 years ago, where the rumor went out that they had allowed one of the Roswell aliens to be viewed by an artist and that he sketched it out and produced this ad for Amoco to sort of begin to soften up the population. That was a rumor. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying that went out. Now, this one is a little more interesting to me because it's, forget about the eyes, but for the moment, the head, the dent, if it's up there, but look at the nose. The nose could be right. The nose has that look. The lack of brow ridges has that look. And this is supposedly a film of a real alien. Supposedly. I'm not saying it is, but, and this lower part of the face, this could be on the money. Now, the big black eyes, let's talk about that for a minute. There is every possibility that the big black eyes that everybody talks about with the grays are actually big soft contact lenses that are put over a regular eye like we have that allows them to see in infrared or ultraviolet or just on the light on this planet or whatever, protect them from the elements. Because you might remember in the alien autopsy film, if you see that, the first thing they do is they pull off this, and there's a kind of a bulgy eye underneath that, which has always impressed me because it looks kind of like maybe the Starchild's eye might have looked. For what this is worth, I can't say anything, but here we have more variations on the same theme that we were talking about. But it still comes down to the DNA test that we were talking about. So now let's jump back in time to where I left you at the end of the first half, and we were talking about the miracle that happened. Now I'm going to tell you about the miracle. And the miracle is sitting in the back of the room at that table back there, and her name is Belinda McKenzie. That woman was the miracle. Because she read that email where I said, I'm done, I'm blowed up, I'm toast, it's over with. And she wrote and said, I've come into some money. I would like to help. I'd like to get an answer to this. I just want to see this answered. What would it cost? And I didn't know. hadn't talked to a lab or anything in ancient DNA lab in those 3 years. What was the point? Nobody gave a hoot. So I said, I'll get on it and I'll find out for you. Well, by then in 2003, what had been 6 labs was now 24 labs. Much wider choice. And I found a new one coming online at the University of Davis in California, Trace Genetics. 2 young men, Jason Eshelman and Ripon Molly, and they were looking for business, as many of them were. And they said, we'll do it for you. And I said, now remember, where I screwed up with Canada was I just shipped the skull off and let them go, let them do it. And they completely botched it. So I want to be there and I want to watch and I want to make sure everything is done right. They said, no problem, we've got nothing to hide, come up. Whatever you want to do, we'll do to make you feel comfortable, but I guarantee you we will give you an answer that you can depend on. You can depend on it. So I said, okay. So I got my girlfriend at the time, and we went up there to the University of California at Davis to begin the process. And what's the first thing you would imagine we would have to do? We had to cut the skull. Had to cut the pieces of bone out of the skulls. So here's the scene. Let me set the scene for you. We're in a room, a standard size room, door one end, windows at the other, and a table in the middle, and this is where the skull cutting is going to be done. And they give us these plastic glasses to protect our eyes from flying bone as the Dremel blade cut in. Now, a Dremel blade, for those of you that don't know, looks like a flashlight, just like a flashlight or a torch, as you call it. And it's got a little stub sticking out the end of wire, and on the end of that is a circular drill, and it's like this. The little thing sitting in there, and that drill is about that big around, and it spins very, very fast. It's a saw blade. And it goes, when they hit the button, boy, it goes, woo, spins real fast, right? So the skull's here on the table, and Jason's going to cut it. And so what they're going to do is cut through the top up here out of the parietal, and they're going to make 4 cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to drop a square of bone, a little over an inch square, out through the neck hole, and you've got your sample. Then they're going to do the Starchild. So, comes to do the human bone, sits there, he just takes the drill and goes, and it goes through, right through, no problem, kicks up some powder, kicks up some bone, because that's what the Dremel blade does, it's cutting, and it creates a little smell in the air that you can smell, very distinctive. We all know what it is. It is the smell of when the dentist drills your teeth, that stinky, nasty ick smell. That is not burning enamel, that is burning collagen. The word is collagen. And that smell is very noticeable for anybody, even a little bit of it, right? Kind of like a skunk. You know a skunk when you smell one, you know this stuff when you smell it. So, cut the 4 slices out of the human, powder kicked up for each time. It's there, it's in the room, but it's not that bad. The smell's not that bad either. Now, put the Starchild down. Thin, little skinny, little Starchild bone. Now, I remembered later that when I was talking to the Canada guys, way back, they said to me one time, in passing almost, boy, this bone is really hard to cut. Boy, this bone is really hard to cut. And it just blew right past me. I didn't pay attention, didn't know why, didn't know what it meant. I wasn't knowledgeable enough. So we're ready to cut the Starchild, and Jason turns that Dremel blade on, and he goes, puts it down, the blade hits the bone, and it just goes, boop, and it just bounced off, just pushed it up off itself. And Jason looked at Ripon like, what in the world was that? Ripon, I don't know. So Jason got over it and he muscled it really hard and he went, and he just pushed it through. And man, that room just blew up with smoke of the powder of the bone. And the stink was nauseating, just nauseating. I went for the door, my girlfriend went for the window, Ripon went for another window. We just had to get that. It was like fog, suddenly. And Jason, now that he's into it, he's got to finish, so he just grinds through the 4 cuts, and that little thin little piece of bone drops out. And you hold the 2 of them up and you can't believe it. It's just amazing. Why do I keep screwing up? See the difference? Look at the difference. Can you believe that? And it's less than half, really. We say half, but in this case, it's a little less than half. You can see. And as other cutting was done on it later, this picture was taken after that, but this is the window that was cut out here the first time. I'll tell you about cutting more later. So anyway, What they did was they cut that, and they took that piece and they cut it into four little 1/4-inch square pieces. That's all they needed. You saw those big chunks that went out in Canada in the lab, the big chunks that went out. Didn't need to do that, not really. What a waste. What a terrible mistake the Canada lab was. I will never live it down. History will vilify me for giving them that much bone and that tooth. I feel horrible about that. But that's where ignorance leads you. There was no guidebook, there was no instruction manual, and I made mistakes, and I was always very upfront with the mistakes that I made. I told them when I started, we're going to put this thing out the way it is, warts and all, from start to finish. And we've done that. Save that for the end, please. So, we had it. We divided it into 4 pieces. They kept 3. They gave me 1, and they said, go get this thing analyzed. This is the weirdest bone we've ever seen. You've really got something here. And they took their pieces. They gave me 1 of each. And they took their 3 pieces each, and they began to work on recovering the DNA. Now, what do they have to do? The first thing is you have to dissolve the bone to get to the DNA. You have to dissolve it. How do you dissolve it? You put it in a test tube, and you cover that test tube with a liquid called EDTA. EDTA. And you put that test tube in what's called a rocker arm, which is a machine that just sits there rocking back and forth. Just rocking back and forth, a rocker arm, just like that. And it'll do that 24 hours a day for 7 days, 1 week, and all human bone is gone to nothing. That is how they do it. EDTA dissolves all human bone down to nothing in a week in a rocker arm. And the human bone was indeed gone after a week. The Starchild bone was not even phased. It didn't even know it was in EDTA. Didn't go after a week, didn't go after 2 weeks, didn't go after 6 weeks, didn't go after 3 months, didn't go after 6 months, and they finally just turned it off. They were just seeing what, if anything, would happen ever, and it didn't. EDTA had no effect on the Starchild bone. It's not human bone. But, luckily, after they realized it wasn't going to dissolve, they took another of the pieces and they put it in a very, very super strong detergent called Tween 20. And Tween 20 dissolved it overnight. Boom, gone. And they now had a liquid and they were ready to extract the DNA. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about the testing. When they sent it off to me, before we get to what they did, they gave those pieces to me and they said, go get them analyzed. And that's what we did. And so this is what we had on our little piece of bone when we took it to a scanning electron microscope. And in the bone layers, you have cortical layer, it's like a sandwich. It's solid up here. Cortical layer down here, and these holes in the middle are the cancellous holes. And that's where your bone marrow moves through your bones. Cancellous holes. Now this powdery stuff here is just bone powder from the cutting of the blade from the saw. Just this bone powder, nothing unusual about it. Now this, though, is very unusual, very unusual. When the girl who did this work saw this, she said, whoa, what is this? What is this? And she, by the way, is still a good friend, and she was at the London lecture. It was fun to get back with her. But anyway, look at this. Look at this. We're going to look at those up close. But these are fibers. Do you see these fibers here? They are unknown in any other bone in the world of any kind that's known. They are woven into, as you can see, the matrix of the bone. They are part of the bone. They add to its resilience because they themselves are very resilient. Why? Because the Dremel blade didn't cut them loose. A Dremel blade, which would cut my wrist off as if it wasn't there, did not snag, just melt through all these things. They are resistant, resilient, and that added to the strength, the great strength of the bone. And let me repeat it. It is unknown in any other bone of any kind, and you would think science would jump all over this with like a 2-ton tick. Just boom! Should be on it. But they don't. They don't want this answer. They don't want to have to deal with what this means to their lives. They want this to go away. And that's why I'm talking to you 10 years later when it should have been, well, it couldn't have been earlier exactly. But anyway, I could have gotten a lot more help. They could have taken over and done a lot more. They could have done like Otzi, the Iceman, you know, the Iceman that was found under the Alps. the 9,000-year-old guy, they've spent about $25 million on him over the last decade, or however long it's been since he was found. They could have done that here too. They could have known everything about it except the final DNA, if they were real scientists. But they're not. They're cowards, protecting their butts, basically. Anyway, so here you go. The knot. We don't know what it is, but look how fat and thick these are compared to the little thin one that it's somehow miraculously wrapped around. We don't know how to explain it, but there it is. These two little fine ones are more like this, but they're not just one kind of fiber. Strange. You'd think there'd be just one kind. There's not. There's multiple kinds. It's very weird. We really don't understand it. Now this is you can see the Dremel blade is cutting really fast through here, and they're coming. Jason's coming in the cut. He let off the speed a little bit, and you got a different kind of cut here. And as he did that, you see these shredded over. You see these. This is part of this bone here, peeled back. Part of this one here, just peeled back, not cut, peeled back. And look at the fibers. This cluster of fibers here. We just call this the claw to give it a name, but there's the fibers, and we're going to see them up close. Look at this. Isn't this amazing? Amazing. Not seen in any other bone at all anywhere. And these little chips on it are just the powder. That's not how they would look. They'd be clean. And you see that they're snagged. There's a wad of them kind of snagged down here on the claw, coming from here. And this is the button, what we call the button, and this is it right here, so you see more of a close-up. This looks like it was cut off, whatever this piece was, but this one continues on up into where it starts, and this is a flared fiber of a different, this is a sheared fiber here. It's just amazing. Amazing. Now this is the button again, and this, you see this fiber that extends down to the claw going back into the bone where it came from. And this is a flare here, and this thin little neck of it coming out here. Well, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, could this be something that grew on it? Could this be bacteria, mold, fungi? And the people that answer that question are mycologists. So the first thing we did was we took it to some mycologists here in England, because we found it here in England, and we asked them what they thought. And they said, well, there are 30,000 possibilities of bacteria, fungi, and mold, but we've never seen anything like this, because generally these things grow on something. They don't grow in something. They don't grow out. They don't emerge out of something. And really, there hasn't been enough time for that, to happen. It's just a pretty fresh bone, pretty fresh cut. So all things considered, we don't believe. But you could get a test, an expensive test called the Maldi-Toff test, and be sure. We never did that because we don't have any money. This is not a money-making deal. I am a poor man, have been a poor man the whole time. I have had to take essentially a vow of poverty to do this work. But I do it because I take very seriously the responsibility of being the shepherd that found the Dead Sea Scrolls. I know that any of you, if you knew what I know, you would give almost anything to be in my shoes for as hard as it's been. It's a huge responsibility. I am carrying on my back hundreds of thousands of people's hopes and dreams and desires about this. And I know it and I feel it. So we get done what we can get done, but I found that every time I ask for money to get tests done, the critics and the skeptics just slag the heck out of me. Oh, he's just in it for the money. You can't trust anything he says. He's just in it to make money. He's making millions of dollars. People are just pouring money in, and on and on and on. All just total lies. And understand, this is coming from people that fight each other fang and claw over grant money within the science system. This is how they live. This is how they make their money, is they fight each other over who's going to get what slice of the grant. And yet when we, the enemy to them, try to just ask for solicit funds from ordinary people, we're in it for the money, and you can't trust a word we say. So you pretty much have to take a vow of poverty and just live with it. It's not fun, believe me. It's embarrassing. I live in a cracker box, 800 square feet. Drive a 10-year-old car. It's tough. But we're going to win, and that's why I do it. We're going to win this one, and that's why I do it. Here we see one perfectly buried. You can't, just unmistakable. You can't miss that one. in the matrix of the bone. Amazing. Here's one that we call the staple. It got snagged here on this rough bone, but it had been cut loose. And you can see, and what's interesting is, look, shredded. The tip is not cut, it is shredded. Resistant, highly resistant. Again, something else you would think science would jump on like a 2-ton tick. They should want to know what this is, to figure it out and maybe find ways to apply the strength of it to our bodies, because it's obviously part of the bodies. Billions of dollars waiting to be made here for the first one to work on this. Are they standing in line? No. You think money rules everything? No. Fear rules everything. They're afraid of this. Okay. So, from the scanning electron microscope, it was recommended that we go to another guy who could do some other interesting tests, some forensic tests. And what he said was, okay, the fibers, I'm impressed. Now I want you to cut a new piece of bone out, and you saw the missing windows in the Starchild. I want you to cut a new piece out, and I want you to do that with a diamond-coated Dremel blade. Now, it's not diamonds like diamonds. It's industrial diamonds, a little more expensive, but not horrible. And he said, that'll get a much cleaner cut, and I want to see what the result is. So we did that, and this is it. This is the result. And as you see, a much finer powder in the cancellous holes. A different look. This is the Starchild, but you see the cortical layer, in the cancellous holes. Like I told you, like a sandwich. Okay? Now, this is the human compared, and you see there's a little bit difference. It's cleaner. It's got bigger cancellous holes, but essentially the same. Comparison of the diamond blade cuts. Then he took a piece of that bone that had been cut with the diamond blade, and he did something different, something interesting. He took a small little pair of pliers, and he snapped off a corner. Broke it off clean. Why? So there would be no powder, no cut powder, to see what the cancellous holes looked like and to see what the bone itself looked like. And then he polished it. Polished it with lapidary tools, which are what jewelers use to polish stones, to polish gemstones. And they do this to see if there's anything unusual about bone, nothing really unusual about the test itself or the procedure. And so when they did, this is what they came up with. This is typical human bone, and this is how it looks when polished. It looks like alabaster. It's pretty. It's pretty. But the key thing I want you to notice is that the cancellous holes are now absolutely crystal clear. Crystal clear. Now, why is that? Because when we die, we all carry within our bodies, and I was talking to a lady about this at the break, we all carry within our bodies the bacteria that are going to consume us down to nothing. Given where we die, the bones may take longer to dissolve, but we're not supposed to live in deserts. We will travel deserts and we will die in deserts, and then our bones are going to bleach like whatever, but that's not where we live. Where we live, naturally, normally, we dissolve down to nothing, dust to dust. You see roadkill and you go by and 3 or 4 weeks later you don't even know it happened. Right? Dust to dust. If that were not true, if not every part of us were not completely disassembled down to our molecules when we die a natural death, we would step out of this building and there would be 1,000-foot high mounds of bones everywhere. Mother Nature cleans her plate, and she does it from the inside out. When you die, you are going to start bloating, and those bacteria are going to eat you up and clean you out, and they're going to clean your cancellous holes down until we could eat out of it. It's so clean. That is the nature of death. Now, with the Starchild, a little bit different. A rougher texture to its cancellous holes, a much milkier texture to its bone. Again, remember, it is more like tooth enamel, which means much higher collagen, much higher count of collagen. Different bone, and it looks it. But also, when he was looking at this, he saw, wait a minute, what's that little red speck there? That doesn't belong there. What's that? Because there should be absolutely nothing there, as you saw with the other one. So he looked over to the right, and he found this, and it was a whole bunch more. It was like, whoa, what is this? That really doesn't belong there. That is every bit as different in its own way as the fibers. Every bit as unique. Every bit as not seen in any other bone. Now, the first thing you're going to think of is, well, maybe that is some kind of marrow or something, desiccated marrow. That's where the marrow goes, and marrow's red when it's... Yeah, but one problem. What happens to blood when it oxidizes? It turns black. You've seen blood on the street. A few hours later, black. It shouldn't be red. There should be nothing in there. Red, green, blue, purple, doesn't matter. Shouldn't be anything in there, but there is. There's a close-up of that area, and you see how much there is and the size of it. Absolutely bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. Sorry. Now here it is backlit, and you see how much little specks of it here and there. Very, very, very strange. So now we're to the point of the DNA testing. Now we're here. What this is all about. The DNA testing of 2003. July of 2003, trace genetics. Now, we're going to take a quick lesson for those who aren't up to speed on what happens with it, and we're going to very quickly get through it. Try to stay with this. Try to understand what's going on. Macro to micro in 5 steps. The human body contains 100 trillion cells. 100 trillion cells. We now have a better image of what $1 trillion is because of all the money talk of recent vintage. There is a nucleus inside each human cell except red blood cells. All of our cells have a nucleus except red blood cells. Each nucleus contains 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. 23 from mom, 23 from dad, 46 together in the nucleus of the cell. 1 chromosome of every pair is from each parent. The chromosomes are filled with tightly coiled strands of DNA. Genes are segments of DNA that contain instructions to make proteins, the building blocks of life. And there is one more smaller unit, the 6th one that is out here, which is base pairs. Base pairs, the smallest amount. Thymine, adenine, guanine, cytosine. Thymine and adenine work together. Guanine, cytosine, always the same. They fit only each other. In the whole human genome, in the higher primate genome, there are roughly 3 billion with a B, 3 billion with a B base pairs. Keep that number in mind. 3 billion base pairs. It's important. Remember it. Now, when you're looking at DNA, you're looking at 2 kinds of DNA, mitochondrial and nuclear. Here's how it works. In a typical cell, you have the cell wall and you have the cytoplasm. Floating in the cytoplasm are as many as a couple of 100,000 mitochondria. Little bitty chips of DNA. About 16,000 base pairs long. With me? 3 billion in the nucleus, and these little chips have about 16,000. Relatively speaking, a very small amount. It all comes from your mother. It all comes from the female line. So all of us sitting here have the same mitochondria that our mother had, our grandmother had, our great-grandmother had, our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother had, right on down the line, with very small little changes here and there, which is how they have tracked us back as a species to about 200,000 years ago. We appear on this planet as we are about 200,000 years ago. You might recall the huge debate between biologists and anthropologists about this, because anthropologists were sure that we should extend back millions of years because we descend from primates, when in fact our DNA shows that we sort of suddenly appear about 200,000 years ago, which, miracle of miracles, is what the Sumerians wrote on tablets about 5,000 years ago. It's another subject entirely. It's what I deal with in my other work. But nonetheless, there it is. Those are the facts. The mitochondria show that we go about 200,000 years ago. The nuclear comes from the mother and the father. Remember, the 23 and the 23 to make the 46. So the whole package, all 3 billion, are in here. 3 billion, 16,000. These are easier to recover. There's a lot more of them. They're a lot more durable. Okay? So we're going after, with the human that was found with the Starchild and the Starchild, both their mitochondrial DNA and their nuclear DNA. This is what you get when you go after DNA, when you recover. Back in 2003, it was primers, and this is the result. This is what comes out of primers. Primers are like biological locks and keys. You take a section of DNA that you know is the same in all humans, and you make between a few hundred and a few thousand base pairs long these molecular keys that will go into a mixture when you don't know what it is, whether it's human or chimp or gorilla or whatever, and you put it in, and if human-only primers pull out human DNA, the keys fit in the locks. The keys fit in the locks. They attach up down the line, those few hundred or those few thousand base pairs, and they are now connected, and they can now read them. They take them, they pull them up in a pen. You've seen them, and they titrate them out into this, the gel sheet. You've seen the gel sheet on the TV and movies and all, and you know what that looks like. They squirt it down into that gel, and it makes those little bars, and they're able to read that. Don't ask me how beyond that. That's just the general outline of it, and you don't really need to know the mechanics of it, but this is how it works. Now, this is real gel sheets from the testing of the adult mitochondrial DNA and the Starchild mitochondrial DNA. Now, the way it works with gel sheets in a lab is when you do it, you do two things to make sure the gel sheet works. You add the researcher's DNA, so this is Jason Eshelman's DNA right here, his nuclear DNA, and these little isolated pieces are called primer dimer, and they show that the gel sheet is alive and working. The recovery of the adult mitochondrial DNA was very easy. As you see, it's brighter than his. Very good DNA. And it is what's called haplogroup A. Haplogroup A, a very typical, common group of Mesoamericans. There's haplogroup A, B, C, D, E, and X. Okay? X is unusual, rare, but the other four are common. Haplogroup A for the human that was with it. Her mother and her grandmother and all that, haplogroup A. Starchild's mitochondrial DNA, as you see right away, is different. This is Jason's DNA, and this is a primer dimer. These four, as with these four you see they're in completely different places. Haplogroup C. Haplogroup C. Now, what does that mean? Big shock to us, by the way. Big shock to us. We were expecting that because of the drama of the scene of how the girl found it, that was its mother. I had called it its mother for a long time, because who else but a mother is going to do that, is going to bury the being and then put the hand over the arm and die with it. So we felt it was its mother. This showed us in 2003 that it was not. They are not genetically related. Had this been haplogroup A, like her, it still wouldn't have proved it was her mother, the mother rather, but it would have been a strong indication. But this put us completely out of the ballgame. Not even possible. So she was a friend, an associate, a caretaker, a lover. She was something, but she wasn't its mother. For sure. Okay? Now, comes time to do the adult's nuclear DNA. Again, Jason's and the adult. Perfectly normal human, as you see, very different from Jason, but it's just typical, but that's a human. Nothing odd about it at all. We didn't expect anything. It's a human. We know it's a human. You can look at it and see it's a human. But it recovered easily on the first time. The DNA is fresh. The DNA is good. There is no real degradation. The story holds up that they were found in a mine tunnel. This doesn't look like 900-year-old DNA. This looks like fresh DNA. And it shows you how badly the Canadian lab botched the job in 1999. They should have gotten something, and they did, excuse me, with the human they did. Remember, they had an easy recovery first time, her nuclear DNA. That's what they were going after. But instead of saying that they were having problems with the Starchild, they just said we're contaminating or something. But they were having problems because Ripon and Jason, this is the Starchild's nuclear DNA. Jason's DNA, primer dimer, but no bar recovery of the nuclear DNA in 6 attempts. Not 1 attempt, not 2. They wanted to make sure they did 6 to show that they weren't making a mistake. That DNA, that nuclear DNA is not there. Now what does it mean? What does it tell us? We know that the mom is human. We know the star child's mother is human because we recovered her mitochondrial DNA. What does this tell us? Dad is not human. Dad is not human. If Dad was human, it would have been as easy a recovery as it was for the human that was with it. So, we have hit a home run here of sorts in 2003. We know Dad is not human, but as Jason and Ripon said, that doesn't mean he's alien. It just means he's a different kind of human. That's all we can say. A different kind of human at the max. Or you would have to say, we just couldn't get a recovery. He said, but, you know, in private, we know we can. We can look at the quality of the DNA and see that we know we can. If Dad was human, we'd have it. Dad's not human. But we can't go to bat for you anywhere in the world and say that this thing could be alien or might be alien, because we're out of business if we do that. We can't say to you if the difference in the father and the star child from human is a hair's width or that width. There's no way with primers to do that, because primers either fit or don't fit. They either fit perfectly, they don't fit partially, they fit perfectly, all up and down the strings that they are, or they don't fit. We can't help you. We can't solve this for you right now, but we can tell you you're on the right track, and we can also tell you that, because we know the scuttlebutt in the field of genetics, if you can hold on for 3 to 5 more years, and it was like, oh my God, 3 to 5 more? If you can hold on for 3 to 5 more years, we know that a test is underway that is going to provide the means to tell you exactly in a percentage number how far away from human it is. And the reason we know that is because they want to know what the Neanderthal's DNA, genome looks like. And so they're working on a process to recover the whole genome of the Neanderthal base pair by base pair. That's what they want. That's what they're developing the technology for. But you will be able to apply that technology to your star child, and you will be able to recover the star child's unknown genome base pair by base pair. And when you get that done, you will be able to lay it down against all the base pairs of a human, all the base pairs of a chimp, all the base pairs of a gorilla, and all the base pairs of a Neanderthal, because they will surely do the Neanderthal before you can get it done. And sure enough, 3 years later to the month, that was July in 2003, we're having this conversation. In July of 2006, a company called 454 Life Sciences in Branford, Connecticut, announces that they have it. They have the ability to do it, they have the machine, they have the technology, and they're going to start on the Neanderthal. At the time, totally out of our range, price-wise. They've spent in the last 2.5 years pushing upward of $10 million to get the Neanderthal's genomes done. Because why? They're picking it apart out of a fossil, out of fossils. Fossils, that's stone. They're picking it out by the hardest. The star child's going to be a breeze compared to the Neanderthal. And when I talked to them about 7 months ago now, a British documentary filmmaker, Matt Richards, called me and said, I want to make a documentary about the star child. I've got a deal, Channel 4 I think it is, and the BBC, they're interested, we're going to make a deal, we're looking good, we want to do it. I said, great. I'm on my way to Australia for a 6-week tour. We'll deal with this when I get back. He said, fine, I'm working on what I'm working on now, and we'll get to it, but I want an exclusive, we're on it. I said, okay, no problem. While I was in Australia, the economy dropped out. The economy fell out. And over time, that deal did too, because they couldn't justify the kind of money that we're talking about because they're firing people left and right. The test now will cost about $250,000. Dirt cheap compared to the Neanderthal. Understand that. $250,000, not bad. And the answer will come in 3 to 4 months. I mean, that is like touchdown bill. That is really good. 3 to 4 months, incredible. I couldn't believe it would be so quick. He says, yeah, there's so many machines out there now, turn it right over. $3 billion, that's a lot of work. And it is expensive. It's going to be expensive. It's got to be. But it's there. It's there. We all know people that blow $250,000 in, we don't know them personally, but we know they exist, in Las Vegas and Monaco on a really grim weekend. You know, and they just shrug it off and, okay, I'll make it back somewhere down the line. No problem. Spend that on your mistress, setting her up in a penthouse. No problem. Okay, so it's there for us. We just have to somehow connect with the right person. But we don't just need now, because that deal fell through, we don't just need now the test money, we need the documentary money, the film money. We need another $250,000 to do that. Why? Because if ever a test had to be filmed start to finish, every single important step of the way, this is it. Because it is the most important DNA test. I know that science says the Neanderthal is, and it is important. I'm not just downplaying the importance of the Neanderthal recovery. But the Starchild's really going to change history in a big way if we get the answer we think that we will. So that test has to be filmed every step of the way, because the first thing they're going to say when we bring in an answer they don't want is, you must have done something wrong. Because we don't allow that answer. We don't accept that answer. We don't believe in that answer. You must have done something wrong. And we're going to have to show them step by step on film that nothing was done wrong. You with me? So this isn't just a $250,000 deal. This is a $500,000 deal minimum. Minimum. But it isn't just a give me $500,000 and you never see it again. It's an investment. If you put up the money, or anybody puts up the money, and this is what I'm trying to get across, this is an investment. You will then own the most valuable piece of film in the world. Or you will be a part owner in owning the most important piece of film in the world for some time. And you will make your money back 100 times over. Right? Somebody's going to bite on this hook. Somebody is going to do this. Probably not anybody in this room or anybody that I've talked to on any of my trips. But people have said to me on this trip, 4 people have said to me in various ways, I think I can help you. It's been a really back-breaking trip, folks. It's been really tough. Poor turnouts, the economy's killing everybody. But 4. It could happen. I'm working on it. I am a dogged son of a gun. If you can't tell from listening to me, take my word for it. 10 years, I'm dogged. I'll get it done. I've come this far. I would crawl over broken glass the rest of the way if I had to get it done. We're going to win this. This is going to happen. Book it.